Welcome to the Geriatric Dietitian, your go-to resource for nutrition that supports health, independence, and confidence in aging. I'm your host, Katie Dodd, registered dietitian and geriatric nutrition expert. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to the 9th episode of the Geriatric Dietitian Podcast, Protein for Seniors, Prevent Muscle Loss and Stay Strong. Now we are continuing our conversation about key nutrients for healthy aging, and today we're talking all about protein and why it's so important for aging adults. Now, I will say, if I were to pick one nutrient to key in on, the one that I tend to think for most older adults can be one of the most important nutrients, it's going to be hard to pick because, again, I said before, all nutrients are important. But when it comes to older adults, protein is often one of the go-to most important nutrients that we discuss. So throughout the duration of this podcast, you're going to hear me coming back to having conversations about protein again and again because it is so important with healthy aging. It plays a major role in maintaining muscle, strength, physical function, and independence. And one of my biggest goals for people as they age is to be able to age the way that you want, to maintain your independence, to live how you want to live. And I just know that protein plays such a big role in that. So oftentimes when people think about protein, they think of it just in terms of building muscle, going to the gym, protein powders. But really, protein is essential for life itself. Protein is found in every single cell in the body and plays an important role, yes, in muscle maintenance, but also immunity, healing, physical function, and overall health. So today, we're going to talk about why protein matters with aging. We're going to be talking about sarcopenia, which is age-related muscle loss. We're going to be talking about protein recommendations for older adults, food sources of protein. We're going to talk about why exercise matters too, along with protein intake, and then some practical tips to get enough protein. As always, this podcast is general nutrition education and not individualized medical advice. Protein needs vary based on lots of things, including kidney function, medical conditions, activity level, illness, and overall health. So it is absolutely important to talk with your healthcare team for individualized recommendations. So let's talk about why protein matters for older adults. Protein becomes especially important with aging because muscle mass naturally decreases over time. This age-related loss is called sarcopenia. You're going to hear me talking about sarcopenia a lot on the podcast too because it is a big deal in older adults. Sarcopenia can increase risk for frailty, falls, disability, loss of independence, and even an increased risk of mortality. This is why protecting muscle is so important when it comes to healthy aging. And the two biggest factors involved in protecting muscles: adequate protein, including adequate calories. Well, I said two. I'm going to say three. Adequate protein, adequate calories, and resistance exercise. We'll talk more about that in a minute. So we are going to talk about calories in the next episode, but just know that I know I'm trying to say I've got a favorite nutrient, but they're all important. So let's talk about protein recommendations in younger adults versus older adults. So the official recommended dietary allowance, the RDA for protein, is actually the same for younger adults versus older adults. The RDA for all adults is 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram's body weight. I know that can be confusing because we don't really use kilograms, we use pounds, but that's when we look at the numbers, that's what it says. But here's where things get interesting. Research time and time again shows that older adults will actually benefit from higher protein intake than the current RDA. Researchers often recommend that older adults consume 1 to 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram body weight per day. So, 0.8 for all adults, 1 to 1.2 for older adults. And again, I'm referencing the RDAs when I'm talking about these recommendations. And really, the research on why older adults need more protein, it comes down to the fact that protein helps with supporting muscle maintenance and overall healthy aging. So even though the RDA hasn't changed, research suggests that older adults need more, and geriatric dietitians will tell you over and over again, make sure you get enough protein. So what does this actually look like? Because I know, what is kilograms? It can sound confusing. You can go online and do some conversions or do the math if you know how to do it yourself. But there are about 2.2 pounds in 1 kilogram. So for a 150-pound adult, a protein intake of 1 to 1.2 grams per kilogram would equal about 68 to 82 grams of protein per day. And again, this is general advice. Individual needs may vary. You're going to hear me say this later on in the podcast, why, it's so important to individualize. If you're someone who is recovering from illness, injury, or hospitalization, you might actually have even higher needs. If you're recovering from burns, there's lots of situations where protein needs might be anywhere up to 1.5 grams per kilogram of body weight. So I mentioned this before, but exercise matters too. Now, this part is really important. Protein alone is not enough to fully protect muscle health. Exercise matters. We gotta move those muscles. Research supports combining adequate protein intake with resistance exercise, so strength training and regular physical activity. The two really do go hand in hand. Muscles need both. The building blocks from protein and the stimulation from movement and exercise. Even small amounts of strength training can help support healthy aging and physical function. Now, of course, be sure to talk to your healthcare team before starting any exercise plan. I am a big fan of working with physical therapists to help you find the best plan for you. So let's talk about food sources of protein. Some foods are naturally higher in protein. Animal products like beef, chicken, salmon, eggs, yogurt, and milk are great sources, but plant foods contain protein too. Some plant-based protein sources include lentils, chickpeas, quinoa, almonds, oatmeal, spinach, and green peas. And I do want to emphasize that even if you're someone who follows a plant-based diet, you don't eat animal products, you can still eat a good variety of higher protein plant-based foods and meet your protein needs throughout the day. Let's talk about what if you don't get enough protein. So too little protein can contribute to lots of issues. Loss of muscle, that's a big issue because if you lose muscle, you lose your ability to be independent because we use muscle to do everything. We don't even think about it. It's a gift we don't realize we have until we lose it. It can contribute to weakness and frailty. This increases your risk of falls. Falling increases risk of fracture, going into the hospital, going into the nursing home, losing the ability to be independent. It could also contribute to poor wound healing, so the wounds that you have don't heal well. If you have diabetes and you're at even higher risk of poor healing wounds, it can cause even more issues. It could lead to malnutrition. And because we often see decreases of appetite with aging, some older adults may unintentionally eat less protein foods and they're not even realizing it. They just don't have an appetite, they're not eating much and don't realize, oh shoot, I'm not getting the protein needs I need and I'm losing muscle as a result. So this is especially common when meals are really small or maybe focused on low protein foods, like maybe just a meal of toast, crackers, soup, or snacks. Sometimes breakfast might be coffee and toast. There is no protein in that meal. So I am a big advocate of including protein sources at every single meal, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. There's some research behind that too. We're not going to go into that, but just making sure that you add in protein with every meal. So can older adults get too much protein? So we're talking about it's not good if you don't get enough, but on the flip side, more protein isn't always better. That's why it's not a blanket statement of eat tons and tons of protein. Very high protein intake can contribute to health issues. It can cause dehydration in some people. For individuals with kidney disease, depending on their level of kidney disease, excessive protein may worsen their kidney problems. And this is why it's really important that protein recommendations should be individualized, especially if you have kidney disease, liver disease, complex medical conditions. But also there's seasons where you might need even more protein. I mentioned before, if you're recovering from burns, if you're recovering from wounds, injuries, illness, protein is a very important nutrient, but it can be very much based on where your health status is right now and what your conditions are. Now, let's kind of back up and talk more generalized health information and not, disease specific, but I want to talk about some practical tips to get more protein. So here's a few practical ways that you could increase your intake of protein throughout the day. I mentioned eating a good source of protein at every meal. You could add Greek yogurt or eggs with breakfast. You could add beans or lentils to soups and salad. You could add milk instead of water to your oatmeal. Not a ton, but a little bit. You could have yogurt or nuts or cheese for a snack. Adding protein foods earlier in the day instead of just saving it for dinner, because I will say a lot of American diets are really focused on protein for dinner, but not so much the rest of the meals. Now, there's all kinds of things you could do. My son, he's a teenager, but he's been really into adding protein powder to his Greek yogurt, and he stirs it up really good, and he actually got me to try it, and I thought it was delicious. I'm like, that tastes like cake batter. So there are lots of ways to get more protein in your diet throughout the day. So Kind of wrapping up on why protein matters for healthy aging. Protein is definitely a nutrient that is incredibly important for healthy aging because muscle health impacts almost everything. Strength impacts mobility, fall risk, independence, recovery from illness, and quality of life. And protecting muscles becomes increasingly important as we age because we are naturally having a decline in muscle with sarcopenia. So it's especially important to make sure that we get enough protein, move our bodies, get resistance exercise, protect those muscles. So in closing, protein is essential for maintaining muscle strength and physical function. Muscle mass naturally declines with age. The official RDA is the same for younger and older adults, but research shows that older adults may benefit from higher protein intake, 1 to 1.2 grams per kilogram body weight. Exercise and protein work together to support muscle health, and protein recommendations should always be individualized. If you want to learn more about protein, head on over to my website, thegeriatricdietitian.com. I have tons of articles about protein on the website. And if you found this episode helpful, be sure to follow the podcast and share it with someone who may benefit from it. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast, and I'll see you next week. Want simple nutrition tips to support healthy aging? Download my free guide, 10 Essential Nutrition Tips for Healthy Aging, packed with practical ways to stay strong, nourished, and independent as you age. Grab your free copy in the show notes or visit thegeriatricdietitian.com.